Let's look at the famous ICHQ9 flowchart of a typical quality risk management process. But in doing so, let's pick up on some of the pitfalls and identify some tips to overcome those pitfalls in terms of the execution and implementation of this process. Well, it's a typical 5-step flowchart, which starts out with that risk initiation, the risk assessment, the identification and design of those risk controls, the development and documentation associated with the output of that risk event, and the risk review of those events, which must be put in place periodically to confirm the effectiveness of your risk controls. On the right-hand side of the flowchart, we see the range of risk management tools which are outlined in the annex of ICHQ9. And perhaps the most underutilized part of the whole process is that risk communication that should be occurring at each of those key steps to the key stakeholders to ensure that those risks that have been identified and the risk controls and barriers that are in place are well understood by all. In terms of the process then, we must remember that risk management processes may be initiated either reactively or proactively. In the case of reactive risk management, we may be dealing with a deviation or a customer complaint. And in terms of a proactive risk management process, that may have been initiated as a result of a new product introduction or a new process or a change management that's occurring in terms of a process optimization on your site. When we get into the risk assessment, which is where a huge amount of the energy tends to go in our risk management processes, we still see problems arising around that risk identification, whether it's in terms of the scope of where those risks might be on a prospective risk activity, of really understanding and getting a good brainstorming of where those risks are and making sure that you've captured all potential risk causes in that initial first step. Or indeed, in terms of a reactive risk event arising, making sure that everybody that's there and participating in this risk management process understands the original risk question and that you know what you're trying to solve for, you know the problem that you're trying to solve for. In terms of the risk analysis and risk evaluation, it's very important that that criteria and the scoring methodologies are reviewed and customized if necessary for each individual event. A one-size-fits-all is not necessarily the appropriate step to take in this case. In terms of the risk control, we would urge you that risk reduction and risk prevention should be the first port of call, the starting point for any risk controls. And only in the event that those risks cannot be reduced or the instances or probability of occurrence cannot be reduced any further, then you're into that designing a risk control and accepting that level of risk. The next step, which is very critical, is to ensure that the risk documentation is well documented, all rationales and justifications are clear, and that it is communicated out to all of those key stakeholders what the current situation is and what those risk controls that have been put in place will entail. Finally, a step that is not often well practiced is this risk review, the periodic risk review by which you go in and evaluate whether the existing risk controls are still fit for their intended use, is a critical activity. And of course, through all of this, we want to ensure that this is a live process, that as new knowledge and new information becomes available, that is folded back into your risk control strategy, and at all times your risk communication strategy ensures that all key stakeholders are on the same page.